The moment she stepped onto the plane, the stares began. Not the kind of stares filled with admiration or curiosity, but the silent, coded glances that made it clear. She stood out, and not in a way everyone was comfortable with. Vanessa Hargrove, dressed immaculately in a custom-tailored charcoal gray business suit, moved with poise and purpose. Her low heels clicked softly against the aisle floor as she scanned the rows, carrying a simple leather tote in one hand and a premium boarding pass in the other. First class, seat 2A. As the CEO of a global logistics company, Vanessa was used to travel, used to luxury, and, unfortunately, used to skepticism. But today felt different. The tension was immediate, subtle but sharp. The kind of tension that wraps around your presence before you even speak. She nodded politely at a few passengers as she arrived at her seat, placing her tote carefully in the overhead bin and pulling out a hardcover business journal to read during takeoff. She had just begun to settle into the plush leather seat when a shadow hovered over her shoulder. "Ma'am," came a voice, too chipper, too controlled. Vanessa turned to see a flight attendant with an overly rehearsed smile. Her name tag read Kelsey. Vanessa returned a calm smile. "Yes?" she replied. Kelsey's tone didn't change. "I think you may be in the wrong seat." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, not with annoyance, but with certainty. "I don't believe so," she said smoothly. She reached into her jacket, pulled out the boarding pass, and handed it over. Kelsey glanced down, her smile faltering slightly. She scanned the pass once, then again. Her brow furrowed. That moment of confusion, Vanessa recognized it instantly. She'd seen it in restaurants, boardrooms, hotel lobbies. The quiet disbelief that someone like her could afford, deserve, or belong in a space like this. As Kelsey stood processing the information, another figure stepped forward, a white man in his late 40s, wearing a navy blazer and designer loafers, with a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Excuse me," he interrupted, addressing the flight attendant without so much as glancing at Vanessa. "That's my seat." His voice was cool and entitled, like someone who believed the universe moved to accommodate him. Kelsey immediately looked relieved. "Yes, sir," she said. Then she turned back to Vanessa. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move to the back." There was no question, no consideration, just the assumption that Vanessa didn't belong there, that he must be right. Vanessa didn't flinch. She calmly reached for her ticket again. "This says 2A, she said, holding it up. "And that's where I am. There's been no mistake." The man scoffed. "I fly this route every other week. This is always my seat." He folded his arms, exuding impatience. "Can we just get this sorted? I have a tight connection in Dallas." The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, looking back and forth between the two of them. "Maybe we can find you another seat, ma'am. Just for today?" Her tone was polite, but her message was clear. "Please move and don't cause trouble." Vanessa folded her arms. "I paid for this seat in full 10 days ago. I chose it. I confirmed it. I'm not moving." The cabin had grown quiet. A few passengers were whispering, watching closely. One woman a row behind Vanessa discreetly took out her phone. Another man 2 rows across leaned into the aisle, eyes narrowed in interest. Vanessa didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The injustice was loud enough on its own. The attendant disappeared to speak to the gate staff, while the man stood there shifting from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to back down. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. "This is ridiculous." Vanessa turned her head toward him, voice level. "What's ridiculous is being treated like a trespasser for sitting in the seat I paid for." By now, murmurs were rising. Someone whispered, "Isn't that Vanessa Hargrove?" Another voice responded, "The CEO? That's her." Social media began to move faster than the plane ever would. The woman with the phone had already uploaded a short clip. "Black CEO told to move from first class despite valid ticket." The flight attendant returned with a supervisor who bent down and politely asked to see Vanessa's ticket. She handed it over again, calmly. He checked it, cross-checked on his tablet, then paused. His expression shifted. He looked at Vanessa, then back to the man still standing beside her. "Sir," he said, voice tight, "your assigned seat is 3C. This seat, 2A, Does belong to Miss Hargrove. The man blinked, visibly rattled. There must be some kind of mistake, he stammered. I always book 2A. The supervisor didn't budge. Not today. And just like that, the man turned and stormed off, heading toward his actual seat. Vanessa turned her gaze forward again, opened her business journal, and resumed reading. She didn't need to explain herself. She had already made her point. The internet would take care of the rest. What neither the flight attendant nor the smug businessman realized was who they were speaking to. They saw a black woman in a crisp suit and assumed she was out of place, but they didn't know her story. They didn't recognize her face, not yet. If they had picked up a copy of Forbes that month, they would have seen her on the cover. Vanessa Hargrove, a powerhouse in global logistics, CEO and founder of Hargrove International, the fastest growing logistics firm in North America, operating in over 27 countries with multi-million-dollar partnerships across Europe and Asia. She wasn't just wealthy, she was influential. She had been invited to speak at Davos, mentored by business titans. Her ideas had reshaped how companies handled international freight, and her negotiation tactics had been studied at Harvard Business School, where she had earned her MBA nearly a decade ago. She wasn't just sitting in seat 2A, she had earned the right to own the entire row if she wanted. Just 48 hours earlier, she had been in Tokyo, finalizing a $200 million merger with a Japanese logistics firm, securing thousands of jobs in the process. She hadn't slept much, but she didn't need to. Her adrenaline came from vision, from execution, from walking into rooms where people doubted her and walking out with their respect and their contracts. And yet here she was, being treated like an intruder in a space she had every right to occupy. She sat still, keeping her composure as the man in the navy blazer glared at her like she had broken into his home. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She simply turned to the flight attendant and said, "I've paid for this seat. I'm staying in this seat." Her tone was sharp but measured. The kind of voice that didn't just speak, it led. The attendant huffed, unable to hide her frustration. "We'll see about that," she muttered, turning sharply and walking toward the front of the cabin. Vanessa watched her go, then turned back to her journal. She made a quick note. Perception is still shaped by ignorance, even in first class. A few rows behind her, a passenger, a young black woman in her 20s, had been watching the entire interaction. She didn't know Vanessa personally, but she knew who she was. She'd seen her TED Talk. She had admired her from afar. And now she quietly pulled out her phone and began recording. She knew something was happening. Something that wasn't new, but still not right. The plane hadn't even pushed back yet, and already a line had been drawn, between privilege and proof, between assumptions and reality. As Vanessa sat calmly in her seat, she noticed a ripple in the cabin. The murmurs had started. People were beginning to whisper. A middle-aged man in 2C leaned toward his neighbor, whispering, "Is that the woman who runs Hargrove Global?" A flight attendant in the galley poked her head out and looked directly at Vanessa, her eyes widening slightly. Maybe she was beginning to realize. Maybe she had just remembered the company retreat where the CEO mentioned Vanessa by name. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that Vanessa had been asked to move. Not because of her seat, not because of a mistake, but because of who people assumed she wasn't. The irony burned. She had flown hundreds of times, had VIP access at airports around the world, and yet here she was, questioned for daring to sit where she belonged. Her phone buzzed. A colleague had texted her, "Saw the clip. It's already on Twitter. 50K views." Vanessa didn't react. She simply looked out the window, the sun glinting off the wing. Let them see it, she thought. Let the world watch what happens when power meets prejudice. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the next woman who looked like her, the next girl with a dream who'd be told she was in the wrong seat. And Vanessa Hargrove had no intention of moving, not now, not ever. What was supposed to be a smooth 3-hour flight turned into a slow-burning, 45-minute spectacle on the tarmac that no one on board would forget. The engines remained quiet, the safety demonstration paused, and the air in the cabin grew thick, not with turbulence but with tension. Vanessa Hargrove sat upright in her seat, composed and silent, as if the chaos swirling around her didn't deserve even a breath of her energy. She had dealt with boardroom battles tougher than this. But what made this moment sting wasn't the inconvenience. It was the familiarity of it all. Another man questioning her right to be there. Another employee mistaking status for skin tone. The flight crew moved up and down the aisle, faces pinched with stress, trying to manage an incident they didn't know how to explain. Somewhere near the front, the gate supervisor had arrived and was now speaking in hushed tones with the lead flight attendant. Meanwhile, the man who had wrongly claimed Vanessa's seat was getting louder, pacing beside the row like a restless animal denied his territory. "This is ridiculous," he said to no one in particular, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She probably got some last-minute upgrade she didn't even pay for." He chuckled bitterly, looking for validation, but his voice landed with a thud. No one laughed, no one nodded. The crowd was starting to shift. It began slowly, a quiet realization moving through the cabin, like wind through tall grass. In seat 2C, a younger woman stared at Vanessa with recognition dawning in her eyes. She leaned toward the man next to her and whispered, "Is that Vanessa Hargrove?" The name ignited like a match. Row by row, passenger by passenger, the recognition spread. "Wait, the CEO?" someone asked. "I think she was on the cover of Forbes last month." Another voice chimed in. "She's on the board at Airline. She's a boss." And with that, the murmur turned into a wave. Eyes widened. Phones came out. People began Googling her name, and the results spoke louder than anyone in uniform could. Photos of Vanessa standing with international leaders. Video clips of her delivering keynote speeches. Quotes from interviews about breaking glass ceilings and building global success from the ground up. And here she was, being accused of stealing a first-class seat she paid for, questioned like a stranger in her own domain. Someone in row 3 said aloud, "She showed her ticket. This is insane." Another added, "Why would you assume she doesn't belong here?" The mood was shifting fast. What started as quiet curiosity was evolving into quiet defiance. People were watching now, not just out of interest, but with intention. They weren't just passengers anymore. They were witnesses. A few people began filming openly, not even bothering to hide it. One passenger near the front uploaded a short clip of Vanessa sitting silently, while the man stood beside her looking indignant. Captioned simply, "Number let Vanessa fly." The hashtag caught fire. Within minutes, it was trending in 3 cities. Comments poured in. "Not again. This is what Black excellence is met with? Fire that attendant." Back in the cabin, the airline staff returned, visibly rattled. They had seen the shift. They could feel the crowd turning against them. And there, still in seat 2A, was Vanessa, unshaken. She hadn't said another word. Not one defensive remark. Not one emotional outburst. Just stillness. Power and presence. She didn't need to argue when the truth was already on her side. The gate supervisor approached her again, this time with a completely different tone. "Ms. Hargrove," he said, his voice laced with nervous apology, "we deeply regret the confusion. There appears to have been a clerical error on our manifest. You, of course, have the correct seat. We apologize for the inconvenience." Vanessa didn't blink. She nodded once. "Thank you," she replied. No fanfare. No victory dance. Just dignity. As the man who had falsely claimed her seat was escorted back to row 3, passengers stared at him in cold silence. The applause didn't come in claps. It came in stares. Stares that said, "We saw what you did. We know who she is. And now we know who you are too." The airline staff had hoped they could quietly smooth things over, fix the misunderstanding with a few polite apologies and a voucher, and move on. But it was far too late for damage control. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the fire had already spread across the internet like gasoline meeting a spark. A short 22-second video had gone live just minutes earlier, showing Vanessa Hargrove seated in first class, calm and composed, while a flight attendant questioned her and a white male passenger hovered beside her, arms crossed, smirking as if justice was on his side. The camera panned briefly to the boarding pass in Vanessa's hand, clearly showing 2A printed in bold. That single clip said more than any press release ever could. By the time the airline staff regrouped in the galley to figure out what to do, the video had already passed 500,000 views. Twitter was in meltdown. Instagram stories were reposting the clip in real time. TikTok had at least 3 creators narrating the situation, dissecting it frame by frame. And the comments? They were ruthless. This is what systemic bias looks like in first class. You'd never see this happen to a white man in a hoodie. Vanessa Hargrove is a CEO. Why are we still doing this in 2025? Journalists began calling the airline's PR hotline within 30 minutes. Some asked for a statement, others demanded answers. A major business columnist tweeted, "Imagine building a $200 million empire and still having to prove you belong in seat 2A. Civil rights groups quickly joined the conversation, issuing statements of support and calling for accountability. "This is not just a mistake," one tweeted. "This is the cost of implicit bias, exclusion wrapped in politeness." Several well-known figures, actors, athletes, entrepreneurs, retweeted the clip with comments like, "I stand with Vanessa," and "Black excellence deserves respect, not suspicion." One post by a Grammy-winning artist read, "She earned that seat 10 times over. The problem isn't her, it's how the world sees her." The hashtag #Let Vanessa Fly was trending #2 globally by the end of the hour. Screenshots of her LinkedIn profile, clips of her conference speeches, and photos from business magazines flooded social feeds. Meanwhile, back on the plane, the cabin had gone eerily quiet. The passengers had watched it unfold with growing discomfort, knowing they had witnessed something far bigger than an airline seat dispute. Suddenly, the flight supervisor returned to Vanessa's row, face pale and voice trembling slightly. "Ms. Hargrove," he began, visibly trying to manage the situation with as much grace as he could gather, "we deeply regret the misunderstanding. After reviewing everything, you're absolutely welcome to remain in your seat. Please accept our sincerest apologies. We'll also be offering you a full refund and complimentary travel credit for the inconvenience." Vanessa didn't look up immediately. She closed the page in the business journal she had been reading. Then she lifted her gaze slowly, fixing the supervisor with an expression that wasn't angry, but wasn't forgiving either. It was tired, worn, familiar. "Thank you," she said quietly. No smile, no satisfaction, no moment of triumph, just dignity. Because it wasn't a victory, it was survival. And survival doesn't always come with applause. As the man who had falsely claimed her seat was instructed to return to his actual spotting coach, he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This is insane." That's when Vanessa turned to him, her tone like ice cracking under pressure. "What's insane," she said softly but firmly, "is how often this happens." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight of her words fell like a gavel. The cabin stayed silent. Nobody dared reply. There was nothing more to say. The plane would take off, eventually. The story, however, had already taken flight, and far beyond the clouds, Vanessa Hargrove had once again proven that power isn't just about money or titles or seats in first class. It's about grace under pressure. It's about standing still when the world demands you shrink. It's about reminding them all that respect is not optional. It's overdue. By the time the wheels of the plane touched down on the runway, the real turbulence had already happened. Not in the sky, but across the internet, in newsrooms, in boardrooms, and inside millions of living rooms where people were glued to their phones and TVs. What had begun as a quiet attempt to erase and diminish a successful Black woman had spiraled into a global reckoning. The video of Vanessa Hargrove sitting silently in her rightful seat while being challenged by a flight attendant and a smug passenger had exploded online, now clocking over 12 million views. It was dissected on morning news panels, reposted by celebrities, and captioned by activists. The airline's CEO released a carefully worded statement within hours of landing, offering a sincere apology to Vanessa Hargrove and promising a full internal review. But apologies were no longer enough. The consequences were swift. The flight attendant involved was placed on immediate leave, pending investigation. The airline's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion training programs were no longer optional. They were accelerated company-wide, mandated for every employee, and evaluated by external consultants. Crisis PR teams scrambled to shift public opinion, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. The brand was hemorrhaging trust. Influencers called for boycotts. Major media outlets aired segments titled Bias in the Skies and When First Class Isn't Equal. But none of that, not even the headlines or viral hashtags, became the core of the story. The real headline came days later, when Vanessa decided it was time to speak. Not for damage control, but for truth. She stood behind a podium at a press conference held in front of the headquarters of Hargrove Global, the logo glinting in steel behind her. A sea of cameras pointed toward her. Dozens of microphones from every major outlet, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, Al Jazeera, were stacked in front of her. But Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't arrive with a team of lawyers or spin doctors. She came with her presence, her clarity, and the weight of every silent moment Black professionals endure in spaces where they're expected to apologize for simply existing. She wore the same Navy suit she had flown in. No makeup team, no dramatic styling, just her. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, her cadence slow and purposeful. "This wasn't about a seat," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "This was about assumptions, about the quiet biases that still shape how we treat each other in this country. About how we, as Black professionals, especially Black women, are questioned, doubted, and diminished at every step, no matter how high we rise." The room was silent, every ear tuned to her words. I didn't speak up for myself on that flight. I spoke up for every little girl who looks like me, every young woman who's ever been told she's too much, or that she doesn't belong. I stayed in that seat not just because I earned it, but because someone, somewhere is watching and needs to know she can sit in hers too. In first class, in the boardroom. In life, her voice didn't crack, her face didn't falter, but her words struck with the force of thunder. Cameras flashed, reporters held back tears. And as she stepped back from the microphone, the crowd erupted, not in polite claps, but in applause that echoed across the plaza, powerful and sustained. Vanessa didn't raise her hand in victory. She simply nodded once and walked off the stage, her heels clicking with the certainty of someone who no longer needed validation from anyone. Within 24 hours, her speech had gone just as viral as the original video. The hashtag Flying While Black became more than a trend. It became a movement. Thousands of stories began pouring in from people around the world. Black doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, students, athletes, even flight crew themselves, each sharing times they had been mistaken, dismissed, profiled, or degraded in professional or personal spaces. A 16-year-old girl in Houston posted, "I saw Vanessa's story. I want to be like her. I won't shrink anymore." Civil rights organizations seized the momentum, launching advocacy campaigns targeting airlines, hotels, and other service industries. Diversity audits were demanded by shareholders. Other companies, fearful of their own skeletons, preemptively rolled out new bias protocols. But perhaps most notably, the airline in question saw its stock plummet. In 1 week, it lost over $80 million in market value. Not because of a boycott, but because trust is currency. And they had spent theirs carelessly. But Vanessa, she didn't just ride the wave, she defined it. Her company saw a spike in interest, her followers grew by the millions, and her words were etched into digital history. More speaking engagements followed, but she turned many down, saying, "I don't want to just talk. I want to build." And quietly in the background, she began creating a foundation for young Black women entering the corporate world, giving them mentorship, access, and most of all, visibility. Because Vanessa didn't just claim her seat that day, she claimed her voice, and in doing so, she gave thousands more the courage to do the same. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more real, inspiring stories, and click the bell icon so you never miss a powerful moment. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Vanessa's shoes? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about standing your ground, even at 30,000 feet.